Hey guys, welcome to this video about the new particle system in Cinema 4D. In this one, I'm going to show you how to add condensation droplets on an object. I think it's going to be pretty interesting as we are going to tackle different techniques. In the tutorial, we're going to be working on a sphere to make things easier, but I'm going to show you at the end of the video how you can easily switch to another object. This is what we're going to have at the end of the tutorial. If you want to reverse engineer the file or if you just want to support the channel, I'm gonna leave a link to my gumroad page so you can get this for a few bucks. Alright guys, so let's get started, and I'm gonna hit Ctrl D, set this to 25 FPS, make this a little longer, and I'm gonna go to my render settings and set this to 25 as well. Then I'm gonna create a new sphere and set this to icosahedron. I'm gonna set this to 40 centimeters. So right away I'm gonna go here and I'm gonna add a backdrop. I'm gonna add some lighting and maybe rotate that 90 degrees like so. And I'm gonna add a new null and drop everything in there. Okay, open up my particle layout here and I'm gonna select the sphere and add a new mesh emitter. This way we're gonna emit from the sphere. Otherwise you can always select your sphere and drop that inside the geometry here. So I'm gonna call that big. Those are gonna be the big drops. I'm gonna select the emitter. In the emission I want a shot of 1000 particles. In the properties here I don't want no initial speed. Let's select the group here, and here we want to draw the radius. Let me add a new null, let's call that particles, drop that in there. Then I want to add a new math node. I'm going to drop that in the big group here, and let's call that math size. We want to assign a radius, and I want to use a field. So for the field, I'm going to add a shader field. So let's go to the shader and add a new noise. Maybe we could set this to object. For the value, let's try 0.2 maybe, which is too big, so let's divide this by 10. So I'm gonna add a new color mapper to that, and I'm gonna set this to yellow. I'm gonna select this sphere, and I want to set a custom color and set this to black. This is just so that we see the particles a bit better. And then here you can see that those are overlapping a lot, and to avoid this we're gonna add a new flock object here, and I'm gonna drop this at the end. Okay, so we don't want no cohesion, we just want them to separate from each other. So let's see. And what we are missing here is a surface attract, and for this to work we're gonna need to select the sphere and add a collider. In the collider I don't want no bounce and no friction. Here we're gonna need another friction just to drain some energy from this system, and let's set this to a pretty high number. So yeah, that's nice. Okay, then I just added a new cube and I made a little drop. So let's drop that inside a subdivision surface. Make this editable. So let's go to the points. We want soft selection enabled. So maybe 100 centimeter is a bit too much. So let's drop that a little bit. Let's start shaping this. Maybe I can just quickly drop in a smoothing and make this a little more like that. Okay, so let's say that's good for us. Just right click and current state to object. Let's delete this one, and here is our final drop. Then I'm gonna hit Ctrl G and I'm gonna call that drop. Then I'm gonna select the group here and I'm gonna go for a redshift object, and here in the particles I want a custom object. So let's drop in the drop. Okay, and maybe this drop is a bit too big for what we are doing, and I'm just gonna move that under the ground plane so we don't see it. Let's go to the redshift render. You can see that it's not facing the right direction, so let's just correct that real quick, and we're going to select the drop, hit S to find it in the viewport. Let's rotate this 90 degrees. Yeah, maybe it's the other way around. Okay, and then I'm gonna make this a little smaller. I'm gonna select the tools axis center, and I'm gonna center the axis on this one, and let's zero out the position. And so here, if I set this to a locator, this line here is the surface. So if we want this to be on top of the surface, we're gonna select the drop and move this just like so. Okay, so we're gonna add a new material to that and set this to water, and we're gonna add that to the particles. Right away, maybe we wanna add a new standard material, and let's call this one water, and this one is gonna be the sphere, and we're gonna drop that onto the sphere. Okay, then I'm gonna change the color. Maybe you wanna add a little bit of roughness to this. And here I also wanna add a material to the backdrop and the camera maybe. So let's show the scene here. I'm gonna set this to 120 like this. So zero out the rotation, and I'm gonna set this like so. I'm gonna set this to a square. And maybe this material, we want this on the drops. Okay, and I think those are a bit too far apart, so let's go to the flock here. Maybe set the separation radius to 1 centimeter. Okay, so that's a bit better. Okay, I'm gonna set this one to 1.2. We're gonna use that for 20 frames. So let's go to basic here. Okay, so let's add a keyframe on frame 20. Hit G to go to the next frame, and we're gonna disable this and add another keyframe. Now, if we are playing this and I rotate the sphere, you can see that the particles don't move. So what I want here is I'm gonna go to the surface attract here, and I want to apply object velocity, and now those are following the surface. So that's much better. So for now, the particles stay in place, and we want to activate some of them to get some gravity. So to do this, we're gonna go to the big particles here. Let's close that. And using Shift, you're gonna use a reproduce. Okay, I'm gonna call this one activator. I want this to be on distribute, and I want to emit one particle. Then in the properties, I don't want no speed. Then with the activator selected, I'm gonna use Alt and add a time condition. I want this to be a pulse, and start frame 0, duration 1 frame with a gap of 5 frames. So every 5 frames, we're gonna emit a particle from one of those yellow ones. I'm gonna control drag the color mapper, add this inside this new particle group, copy paste the name. Oh yeah, and I wanna select the group and draw a radius, and set this one to red. So here you can see some of those red particles, and we're gonna use them for a new field condition. So let's add that inside the big particle group. The field condition, we wanna use the activator group. I'm gonna set this to a really small number, like 0.01. And when the condition is met, we wanna switch the group. So let's add a new particle group, and this is gonna be active. And we wanna select the switch group here, move that here, and here we're gonna call that activate. So let's control drag the color mapper here and give that a different color, so maybe green. Select the group and draw the radius. So those particles don't need to be there all the time, so we can just give them a life of 1 frame, so they just activate the particles and then disappear. So in the active group now, I want to add some gravity and some friction. Let's see. Okay, so they get activated and get some gravity, and then maybe we can add more friction. And then I want to add a surface attract. And let's add that at the end here. In the surface attract, I'm going to make the radius bigger. I'm going to add a lot of strength. For the surface attract, I noticed that even with a lot of strength here, they don't really stick to the surface. So I don't know why this is working like that. Okay, so let's go back to 2000. I just control drag this one, and usually it works a bit better. It's still not perfect, but with a little more friction, that's pretty much what I was looking for. Okay, and then when the green particles get over here, we want them to detach from the sphere and fall to the ground. So to do that, we're gonna need a field condition. So I'm gonna select the sphere, and using Alt, I drop that inside the connect. I don't want to weld the points. I'm gonna select the connect, and I'm gonna make an instance of that. I'm gonna hit Alt G to make a null. I'm gonna call that detach bottom. I'm just gonna hide the scene here just to make sure we are dealing with the instance. Then in the content browser, I'm gonna look for select facing, invert selection, and delete. All right, so let's drop that in the connect instance. So here we are using select facing to select the polygons that are facing down. And then here we can play with the tolerance. So by default, this should delete only the bottom faces. And that's why we are using invert. And then we delete everything else. Let's move that connect out of the scene here. And I'm going to add this inside a null. Just going to call that object. I'm going to make this a cube and make this bigger. So here, one thing is if I rotate that, you can see that the select facing is something that's happening locally. So let's reset the rotation here. And to get around that issue, we're going to select the instance, and using Alt, we're going to drop that inside the connect. And we don't want this to weld the points. And we're going to select those three and move them here. If I select the connect instance now and rotate that, you can see that it's updating correctly. Let's hide this. We want to see the object. And what we want now, we want this to follow the main object. And to do that, we're going to select the object and add an expresso tag. I'm going to drag in the object. I'm going to click on the P here, drag that in, and then I'm going to click on the R and drag and drop that over here, optimize. So for the position, we want to pipe this in the null position here, and then the rotation. Let's select the connect here and drag the rotation and connect that to the rotation of this null. Let's select the bottom part, and we're going to add a rendering tag display, and I'm going to use gumroad shading. So now if I hit NG, you can see that our selection is now updating and it's moving along with our sphere. All right, and then we're going to use that as a field condition inside the active group. And for the field, we're going to use the connect here. Okay, set this to surface and maybe a radius of 1. So when they touch the bottom part here, we want them to switch group. So here we're going to need a new group then. And here we're going to assign the group. So I'm going to rename this detached. Then with the group selected, I'm going to use shift and add gravity. Okay, so let's select the detached group, and in the draw tab, we want to draw the radius. Okay, and here you can see the little green dots falling down. And as you remember, we have this backdrop. So we're going to add some ground floor, and using shift, I'm going to add a new plane inside. And I want to move this a little bit like so. So let's move the plane. I'm gonna call this collider. This could be smaller. For the collision to work, we're gonna need another collider on this one. Okay, no bounce. We're gonna keep a little bit of friction, and in the detached here, we also need a collide. So let's add that just after the gravity. And okay, so that's not too bad. We just want no bounce on those. Okay, so let's hide this scene for now. Let's select the big group, and I want to uncheck draw radius. And what I would like to add now is some trails. Maybe I just want to add some color to those. So let's control drag the color. This could be blue. And let's go to the active now, and selecting the group, I want to use shift and add a reproduce, and it's going to be active trail. Let's rename the group. I'm going to move that at the end. Okay, and this is going to move here. So here I want this to be happening per particle, and I want a constant emission of 2 particles. Then in the properties, I want to set the speed to 0. I don't want them to last forever. I'm just gonna set that to 15. Let's go to the color, and I want to inherit the parent color. Still in the properties, I want to make sure the group is set to active trail here. And then I'm going to select the group and draw radius. Okay. So I want them to shrink over time. So let's select the active trail, and using shift, I want a lymph node. I want to multiply the radius by 0.95 just to have some fall off in the shape here. Okay, and then when they switch to the blue group, I want to add some more particles here as well. Those are different sizes, so maybe when we switch the group, and maybe I want this to assign a radius of 1 centimeter. Okay, so this way they are just the same size. Okay, and then I want those blue ones here to generate new particles. In the detach here, I want to add a new reproduce, so I'm gonna call this one trail. I'm gonna call the emitter the same, and here, okay, we are in the right group. The speed should be 0. I'm gonna set the color inheritance to 100, and I'm gonna set this to per particle. And for the count, I want maybe 4 particles spawned just once and with a little offset, so maybe 0.1. Okay, so let's select the detached trail here and draw the radius. Okay, and so those need some gravity as well. So this gravity and collide could be applied to the detached and the trail as well. So let's select the detached group and the trail, and we want a new multi-group. We're going to call that detached multi-group and move that here. And here in the multi-group, you can see that you are affecting detached and detached trail. So here we could select both gravity and collide and drop them in the detached group here. Okay, and we want to avoid them to be on top of each other like that. And so to do that, we're going to use a flock. Okay, so that's interesting. Okay, let's maybe make the cohesion strength higher, but with less of a radius, a little more separation, but with a smaller radius, like maybe 0.5, 0.3 maybe, and on the floor here, on the collider, I'm just gonna add a little bit more of a friction. Okay, maybe we could get here to the flock and maybe bring that back to 1. Okay, maybe this could be 1 as well. Okay, next step would be to add smaller drops just to have a little more variety. So small, small, And so this is already set up to use the sphere and the small particle group here. For the speed, we are at 0, that's fine. And here we want 100,000. And so here in the small group, we're gonna keep the color shader. Let's set that to a different color. We're gonna delete everything except the math here, and we're gonna use the same shader field. So let's delete this one. We're gonna move this over here. So this math object is already using the right shader here. And this one, we're gonna have to assign it. And here in the value, instead of that, we're gonna use 0.005. So those are gonna be a bit smaller. Here we still have the redshift tag, and it's already using the drop geometry. So let's uncheck the activator for now. And we wanna see the big drops. So let's go to draw and draw them. That's it. And B. Okay, let's go to the connect, and on this one we wanna be on custom and black. Let's draw those smaller ones. And you want the small blue ones here to avoid the yellow particles. We're gonna need a new predator prey here, and just so that's a bit easier, we're gonna select the small group and the big group, and we're gonna make a new multi-group. I'm gonna call that drops multi-group. I'm gonna drop the predator prey in there. We want the smaller ones to avoid the bigger ones, so the bigger ones are gonna be the predator, and we don't want no pursuit, so let's set that to 0, and the small group is gonna be the flea. The flea radius could be only 1 centimeter. Okay, so let's hit play and see what this does. So we're gonna need to attract those to the surface as well. So let's open the big group, and this surface attract, we wanna bring that just after the predator prey. So this is now affecting both the big particles and the small ones. Okay, and maybe the friction that you have here, we could drop that in there as well. So it's gonna affect the small particles. Okay, and here, as you can see, those are pushed apart from the yellow particles. And we could also try to push them apart from each other by control dragging this flock inside the small group. But this time we want a really small radius. So let's set that to maybe 0.2. Okay, and if I hit render now, I'm gonna need to hide the particles. So on render time, we just need the big particles, the small particles. That's nice, but I want to go to the drop here, and I want this to be a little more inside there. Yeah, I really prefer that. And as you can see here, we have a little pattern here going on, and this is because of the resolution. So let's go to the sphere and maybe set that to 128. And so here right away, things are getting a little slower, right? And if I now hit render, you can see that you have a much better result. I also want to make sure that things stop moving after a while. And so to do this, we already have the flock here that I turn off. This one as well. And we're gonna need to do the same for the predator prey here. So let's go here, right click the enable, and we're gonna go to animation, show track. So here's where we turn that off. We're gonna do the same for the predator prey, and we're gonna add a keyframe, drop that in, go to frame 21, and I'm gonna disable that and add a new keyframe. Okay, so in the big here, we wanna switch on the activator, and then we're gonna select the big group and the small group, and we're gonna uncheck draw radius. Okay, let's uncheck the small ones here as well. So those are traveling in a straight line, and instead of that, we would like them to change direction depending on the yellow dots here they meet along the way. And we're gonna do that using a predator prey once again, and let's drop that at the end here. And then the predator group is going to be the active group, and the preys are going to be the big particles. Okay, and here we don't want the yellow dots to move, so let's set the free strength to 0. And something else that we could add to this is those green lines are always traveling at the same speed, and we would like to randomize that. So let's go to the active particles here, and in the friction, we want to add a field, and we're going to go for a random field. We're going to use the default purling noise. So by filtering this with the noise, we have more or less friction, but the maximum amount of friction we get is this. So we could set this to something higher now, and the size here could be only 30% scale. So this way the particles are now slowing down sometimes, and then they speed up depending on this random field. So here I'm gonna hit Shift V, and I wanna go to the HUD, and I want the frames per second. And if I hit play here, we have a pretty low FPS. And this is mostly because we have a really dense mesh for the sphere, and we are testing collision on that. So we need enough segments for the rendering to be nice, but just dropping this down to 32 is doubling the FPS. So it's going to be better to work with. But we don't want to come here and change the value every time. So what you could do is just selecting the sphere. Let's go to the user data and add a new one. And here we want a boolean. I'm going to call this one render, hit OK. And on the sphere, I'm going to add a new expresso tag. So I'm going to bring in the sphere twice and select the sphere, go to the user data, and here I'm going to drag the render. Then in the sphere, I'm going to grab the segments. And here I'm going to search for a condition, and I'm going to use that as a switch. I'm going to connect that to the segments. And so when this is clicked, we want this to be 1 to 8, and otherwise we want this to be maybe 24. And if I select the sphere, go to the user data, and we could just check this to switch between the two resolutions. Let's open that up, and I would like this to be the other way around. So let's switch those values. So now when this is checked, we have the rendered version. And then we could drag this inside the viewport here, then right click, and we want to show this always. Otherwise, if we deselect the sphere, this disappears. So with control, I'm just gonna drag this over here. And here I can directly click in the viewport and activate or deactivate that. So let's keep the low-res version for now. Okay, let's activate the draw radius on the big ones here. When those green particles get down, we want them to erase the yellow particles. And so to do that, we're gonna use a field condition, drop that inside the big particle group. I'm gonna call that absorb, okay, and the field is gonna be the active group. Let's set this to 3 centimeter. And when this condition is true, we wanna switch group. We wanna add those to the active trail group. Okay, so, and we do that because if you remember, those trail particles have a math object that makes them smaller. So if we switch the yellow ones to the trail particles, they should get smaller as well. So here we are touching this one, for example, and if I hit play, you can see those are getting smaller. So something I want to add just to make sure those are totally gone. I want to go to the active trail, and here I'm going to add a new condition. So I'm going to call this size kill, and if the radius is less than 0.2, we want to kill the particles. So using shift, I'm going to add a kill. Okay, and now we're going to control drag this condition to the smaller particles, and maybe this can be a bit smaller, maybe 2 centimeter. Here you can see that when the drop is passing through, it's gonna remove those particles. Okay, so let's deactivate the smaller particles now. Let's uncheck the radius here. So here when those detach, maybe we want them to have a little bit of friction before they fall down. Okay, let's go to the detached group here, and using shift we're gonna add a friction, and maybe this could be more like that, or even higher. We want this to be happening at the beginning, really, so we're gonna need a new condition. We only want friction when the particles are less than 10 frames. Yeah, maybe this one is gonna be darker. And as you can see, if I now zoom in a bit and have a look at that, you can see that the darker blue here is falling straight away and the other are following. When we switch those to detached mode, we're gonna control drag the math here, and it's gonna be H. Yeah, assign is good, and we want an H of 0 frame. This resets the age of the blue particles when they switch. And now if we have a look here, the darker blue is affected the same way as the lighter ones. Okay, pretty nice, but we don't want this effect to be too obvious. So we're gonna go back to the condition here and maybe set this only to 3 frames. Okay, so this is not that obvious, but it's just adding a little bit of hang to that. So yeah. Okay, something else we want to address. If we watch this trail here, the drop is falling, but the trail is still there and takes a while to disappear. What we could do is going to the active trail here. We have the math for the size. So just let's call this size, and we're going to use a new field condition. Call that size slow. And for the field, we're going to use the active group. We're going to select this and set this to 15 centimeter. Okay, once the head here is switching to the detached group, those keep the same size. We're going to control drag this setup, and this is going to be size fast. And we're going to just simply go to the active here, going to the remapping, and we want to invert that, and we want to change the value of the math. So let's divide the size by 2 every frame. Here, for example, when the head here is falling down, those disappear almost instantly. So maybe this is a bit too quick, but yeah, 0.6 is better. And now that we have that, we want to remesh the particles. So to do that, we're going to add a volume builder first. Then with the volume builder selected, using Alt, I'm going to add a volume mesher. So in the builder here, I want to use the active trails, detached, and the detached trail. Okay, so this is way too big. Let's just uncheck the measure for now. And I want to select this one, use particle size, and on this one as well. And here we don't see anything anymore, and this is because the voxel size is too big. So let's make this maybe 0.2. Yeah, so this is better, and now we can see those trails. Let's activate the measure. So maybe we want to add some smoothing to that. So let's select the measure, and using shift we're gonna add smoothing. Okay, so let's bring back the stiffness here. Maybe the smoothing could be something higher. And then we could go to the measure here and play with the voxel range just to give this a little more thickness again. Maybe this is too much, maybe 65, something like that. Let's show the backdrop here. So I'm pretty happy with those ones, but those could be a little smoother. And to do that, we're going to go to the builder and we're going to add a SDF smooth. But as you can see, it's smoothing those particles as well. So we want this to be affecting the detached particles, and we don't want the active trail here to be affected. We're going to drop that on top of the SDF smooth. Okay, and so here right away, we are smoothing that a little more. You could play with the strength or also with the voxel distance. So keep in mind everything is depending on the voxel size. And here I think that I added too much of this smoothing, because as you can see, those particles here don't have any meshing. Yeah, maybe I went too far with that. So is it the iterations? be the voxel distance that's too high. So let's set this back. Yeah, you have to find the right balance here to get something that works. So it's not a fluid simulation, so it's going to be really hard to have a really nice fluid. What I forgot here is to control drag the material here onto the measure. Okay, and here we now have those nice little drops and the drops on the floor. So if I now would like to bake that, I would have to go back to full res, and so it's going to be longer to calculate, but it's going to be more accurate on those smaller drops. So what I would recommend is selecting all the groups, not the multi-groups, but the actual groups here. And then I would go to select, selection filter, then create selection object. And by doing that, we can just simply double click this little icon and we're going to select all the groups. If you have many groups to select, this will be pretty handy to save us some time. So just make sure we are in high res here for the sphere, and then we're going to cache the scene. Select the cache here, give it a name, and wait for this to cache. If you want to clear the cache, instead of going one by one here, you could simply double click the selection and clear object cache, and this will bring you back to before caching. Okay, so that's the setup we got now. And just to wrap this up, so I just want to make a couple changes here. So for the emitters, I don't want to emit from the sphere, but I want to use the connect object instead. And I also want to move the collision tag to the connect. This doesn't change anything. And the reason I did that is because I want to be able to change the object easily. Let's go to the content here and maybe import that beer can. I'm just gonna scale that can so it's gonna match a little more the scale that you are working at here. Let's move that down. And then all I have to do is bring that inside my connect. And here I can just delete or just uncheck the sphere. If I hit NB now, select the object and I rotate it, you can see that those selected polygons here are updating. One last thing you want to check though is selecting all the objects inside here and switch to polygon mode. And you want to make sure that nothing is selected in there. Otherwise, those operations are not gonna work properly. Let's just watch this in the render view. So yeah, this is pretty much it for this one. And yeah, I hope you learned something. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one. Bye.